Hey guys, my name's Kian Hushman, and today we're going to be checking out how to get a great modern metal / djenty bass tone. Let's have a look.
Tell me how's it feel sitting up there, feeling so high, but too far away to hold me. You know I'm the one who
Okay, so the first thing that I do obviously when making my bass tone is loading up the instrument, and the instrument that I use pretty much on everything that you've ever heard from me is the Inferno bass by Impact Studios. I have experimented with a lot of other bass VSTs, and for me the Inferno bass, or pretty much anything from Impact Studios, sounds the best by far. I'm keen to try out Djent bass at some point, which I haven't tried, because that does sound pretty cool from what I've heard, but for now we're going with what we've got, and that is the Impact Studios Inferno bass. As you can see, this is only the DI version. You can purchase the pre-processed tones along with the DI version, which is also within the Kontakt instrument, so you just click a different tone and whatever, but I like the DI version because I can make my own tone, which you guys can see right here. I then use the instrument, load it up into a piano roll, and then program bass MIDI, and this MIDI track is from the Halsey Without Me cover from a couple days ago, but for now today I'm going to show you guys how to get from this to this. You might have noticed that I do have these 4 colored bass tracks. I did try an experiment in this session with having the 3 bass tracks here and then blending it into one bus, like I've seen in a lot of other YouTube videos and stuff like that. But for the longest time I always had it in the one mixer, and I just went back to it because it's just easier and more simple for me. You obviously have more versatility with having the 3 here and then blending it into the one bus, but I think for the purposes of my channel and what I like to do, I just have it in the one, and then I have that feeding into the instrument bus, and then the instrument bus is going into the master bus. And for all the program and plugin settings on here, just take a look at Nolly's mix class. They're pretty much taken straight from there. Okay, so the first thing I do before I even load up the bass into the Darkglass Ultra plugin is throw a compressor on it. And the reason why I do this is so that before the actual DI even hits the Darkglass Ultra, it's very even and it's not really like peaking too much, and it kind of just controls it a little bit. Very, very subtle. But then going onto the Darkglass Ultra, this is pretty much the whole tone. Without it, it would sound like this. With it, it sounds like this. So I'll just go through the settings of what I use on the Ultra. So obviously oversampling is flicked on high, so you can get the best sound quality. I'm using the B7U instead of the VDU. Distortion on for some sections, I'll go through that in a sec. For the chorus, I use the distortion, and then for the section that you're hearing now, I actually turn the distortion off. So for the section within the song that you're hearing now, it sounds like this. As you can tell, they're very contrasted. One's a little bit more softer for the verses and stuff, and then the other one is very crunchy and kind of melds in with the rhythm guitars when the chorus kicks in. So these are the settings that I use, both with and without distortion. The only changes that I flick the distortion on. So master is pretty much dead in the middle, blend all the way up, level at about like 7 or 8 depending on how much you like to have it. Drive I flicked all the way up because I want it to be really crunchy. Bass isn't turned up too high, but it still has a little bit of oomph. I'm using the middle attack on the 250 Hz range and dialing down low mids just a touch, sitting at somewhere around like 3. Reason why I do that is just to like clear up the low end a little bit more and kind of give a bit more clarity in the bass. With that being said, I do have the 3K range turned up a little bit on the bass to meld with the rhythm guitars, because the rhythm guitars anywhere between like 2.5 to like 4.5 I find kilohertz is like that kind of really high gain kind of sound, and having this just makes it blend in with the guitar more. I took this from Nolly, of course, Nolly Get Good, the former bassist and current mix engineer of Periphery, that the bass is more like an underlying component of the guitars rather than its own thing. So when you blend it all together, it sounds like one big instrument rather than having its own kind of feel. I've always liked that kind of sound. It makes everything sound a little bit more cohesive and stuff, so that's the approach that I go for as well. I'm going to play the bass track and then play around with the knobs as you hear it, so you can kind of hear how it's influencing everything. So as you can tell, when I push the low mids up, it gets way too woofy. Same with the bass, and similar thing happening with the high mids and treble. When I push them all the way up, it gets way too shrill. So I feel like having them here, especially for this instrument, the Impact Studios Inferno bass, has like a good middle ground for a bass tone. So without all the post-processing, this is what it sounds like by itself. And then with all the post-processing, this is what it sounds like. A little less shrill, a little bit more focused in the low end, and it just kind of sounds a little bit larger, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go through everything that I do after the Darkglass so you guys can mold your own bass tones. I should say now that you shouldn't really follow everything that I'm doing as gospel, because it will depend on the bass VST you're using, and two, the song that you're applying it in. But for this kind of style and this bass VST, I feel like this is a great bass sound. After the Darkglass, I load up an instance of Virtual Mix Rack, a little bit of high lift going on, and just a touch of low lift just to give it a bit more life. I have seen in other bass tutorials that the high lift gets put up way up, and that's because the bass DI that they get started with isn't actually very hi-fi, but I feel like this bass DI that comes with the Impact Studios Inferno bass is very hi-fi sounding, very high definition. There's a lot of high end in it. If I took away all the post-processing on the bass, this is what the DI just sounds like. It has a lot of string, a lot of high end going on, so you don't really need to kill that high lift, just a touch and it should be enough. Here I like to have a bit anywhere between that like 400, 500 range, where it kind of battles with the guitars a little bit, the mid range of the guitars. I turn it down just a touch at a very slim cone, just to make sure that the guitars and bass aren't interfering with each other too much. And then obviously a little bit of high end going on. And then rather than messing around with the whole high end with this one knob here, I do like to have a little bit of focus in the high end. So I pick certain frequencies and then adjust them accordingly, whether it's to boost them or take them out. So I felt like in this instance, 4.5K being boosted up by quite a lot, then taking away some of that shrillness around the 5.5K range, just a touch, really makes it more focused. So I'll play with and without so you guys can hear the difference. So as you can probably tell, turning up the high end around the 4.5K range doesn't really like give you that sizzly kind of sound, but it does when you do it in the 5.5K range. So where was it? Just somewhere around here. So when I turn it up, you can really hear that ear picky kind of sound. So I just turned it down just a touch around 3 dB just to kind of level it out a little bit. Straight after Virtual Mix Rack we have R bass. Now R bass is great because it just adds like a low end lift without overpowering it. So it basically targets one frequency or like one area, and then you can kind of adjust how much low boost you want. So I feel like having it around like 100, I can even move it to 100, it won't matter. Having it to 100, there we go, having it to 100, I feel like that's where the bass guitar lives in my mixes anyway, and like 50 is where the kick drum lives, and then like 150 to 200 is where the bass of the rhythm guitars live. So having it at 100 I feel like is a good middle ground, and as you can see here, it's not even being boosted that much because it can get really overpowering if you overdo it. I'll play with and kind of muck it around just so you can see how much it's affecting the bass. So as you can tell, it's very subtle, but it does give a little bit more roundness in the bottom end, which I do like. And moving on from there, we have an instance of a multi-band compressor in FabFilter Pro MB. And the reason why I put this there so that if the bass ever does like oversee the threshold in the mix where it's like too much, it does cut out some. But when it's turned on, it's a little bit more focused, but you still get that low end coming through. And then straight after that we got an EQ, so not much going on here, just a little bit of shelf going on to cut out that really low register that builds up in all your mix channels, just to kind of alleviate that. And then a little bit of a boost at 350 because I felt like that's what it needed in this mix, especially with this guitar tone. But then again, you can play around with this and kind of adjust it to your own mix and stuff like that. And then here we got a lot of cutting going on, and that's due to the high picky frequency of the dingwall. I'm going to turn them off, and you're going to really see how much it colors the tone when I turn them off and how like ear picky it is. So I'll play it and then I'll just muck around the EQ so you guys can hear. So as you can tell, when these are turned off, you get a lot of those like picky frequencies coming through, and this just alleviates that. And then straight after the EQ, we have another instance of virtual mix rack, and I just threw on a compressor and did rock bass. It's just a preset, and this is just so that in my mind, okay, so for my own ease of mind, that the bass isn't like fluctuating too much, because I want it to be very even across the whole spectrum, so that it doesn't really overpower anything else in the music, in the mix at any given time. It's kind of just like a nice level of bass throughout, because the worst thing is that some sections are really more bassy than others, and then you just got to try alleviate it. I hate doing that. I just like having it as one constant like accompaniment to the guitars and just having it as one level the whole time. And then straight after that we have a limiter, just to make sure it doesn't peak. Obviously it's doing nothing, it's never going to exceed that threshold, as you can see here. But I just like having it there for ease of mind, especially when I'm mixing, so I can see levels and all that good stuff. And then straight after the limiter we have another EQ, and again we're like just really carving out that low end frequency stuff that you can't even hear, the human ear probably can't even hear, but I just like doing it just to have it as peace of mind, so that across all the mixer channels, especially like the kick and the low guitars and stuff like that, that it doesn't really mess with that, and by the time it goes through the instrument bus and master bus, it isn't coloring or building up or anything like that. I just like taking it out completely. So yeah, that's how I program my bass tone. So if you're going for something a little bit more progressive metal or djenty, this is generally the approach that I take, and the big part of that is the Darkglass Ultra plugin. I absolutely love the way it sounds. It pretty much makes the bulk of my tone, and I'm not being endorsed or paid by anyone to say this, but this is genuinely like the best sounding bass sound that I've ever gotten out of anything. So if you haven't picked it up yet, I highly suggest doing it. If you guys like the video at any time, be sure to leave a like, and if you want to see me do more stuff like this, like programming tones and all that good stuff, definitely subscribe, because I will not be stopping doing all of that. Let me know with a comment what you guys think of the bass tone, if you want to see anything else from the channel and stuff like that. But until next time, I will catch you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. Ciao.